Welcome, Ms. Julia Strong. It's an honor to have you here with us today. Before we start, I'd like to maybe ask you a couple of questions so that we all can get to know you a little bit before you start the seminar. I know that you're the director of the National Reading Campaign, and perhaps you could explain to us some of the campaigns within the smaller campaigns within that campaign that you've been working on.
Well, the National Reading Campaign was something that followed on for the National Year of Reading. We had a National Year of Reading in 1998 to 99, and the government paid for that. And when they asked us to do the National Year, we said we wouldn't do it unless we could have a National Reading Campaign to follow on. Because if you want to change a culture, if you want to change what people do, you cannot do that in a year. And so we said we would need more time, and therefore we would want some funding to continue. In the year we had a lot of money. Now we have a very little money, but at least we have a little bit. And we concentrate really on four things. First of all, information. So we have a website that tries to have information on all the reading campaigns that are in the country, and lots of information and research about reading. And then we felt that school was a very, very important place, because if you want to get through to the children, school is probably the best place to get through to children. And therefore, we have a campaign in the school called Reading Connects to try and get every school to encourage the children to love reading. We're focusing not on how you read, but on making children love reading. And then we also, in the UK and certainly in the Western world, and I think in most of the world, boys don't take to reading as much as girls do. And looking at the audience today, it might be the same situation here. There were very few men, I counted earlier on, even less now, I think. Anyway, we have a campaign called Reading Champions, which is aimed at getting men and boys to champion reading and to turn men and boys into readers. And we have a family reading campaign, which we're going to launch this autumn to try and encourage reading in the home. And all of these things I am going to be covering in my talk.
And all these reading campaigns, how did you yourself come to be so interested in the promotion of reading?
I come from a family where my parents were poor, but they valued education. And they didn't have any education themselves, but they were determined that their children would be well educated. And so my mother taught us all to read when we were all very small. And I suppose that background made me value education, value reading. I was a teacher for 25 years. And I decided that I wanted to do something slightly different. And I was interested in encouraging children to read and write better, encouraging everybody to read and write better. And so I was very, very lucky and got a job with the National Literacy Trust to be able to do just that.
Well, we're very excited today to hear what you have to tell us about reading, your experiences with the promotion of reading. So please give a warm welcome to Ms. Julia Strong.
I wanted, first of all, to find out who is in the audience, as it were. So, as I understand it, people have come here because they are teachers or librarians or parents. Now, obviously, the teachers and the librarians may also be parents, but if you could think about what is the reason have you come here as a teacher, a parent, or a librarian. So, first of all, have you come here as a teacher? Two people. As a librarian? About 5, 6, 7 people. And as a parent? That's quite a lot of people, and then there's quite a lot of people, and I'm not certain why you're here, but I'll probably never know. Okay, so thank you. As you can see from the title of my speech, I'm talking about schools, libraries, and parents working together. One of the things that we have very much found through campaigning in the United Kingdom is that you have to work in partnership if you are to be effective. And that partnership is a very, very important thing. I wanted just to say a few words about partnership before I begin on the main speech. Because partnership means listening to the other person. Partnership means thinking about, obviously, what your goals are, but letting the other people tell you what they want. And actually being willing to change a little and think, wait a minute, I mustn't try and do everything that I want. I've got to hear what they want. And that is a very, very important thing, because sometimes you try and have a partnership and you feel bullied. You think this person is just trying to make me do what they want. and you want them to listen to you. So we try very much to encourage people to work in partnership. And we have found that once you can get people to do that, it can be, very, very powerful indeed. I wanted to start really with the why of reading. Because if we're trying to encourage young people to love reading, well, why? Because if you understand why, you're much more liable to be motivated to do it. So I wanted you just to talk to the nearest person sort of sitting near you. If you think about what a difference it would make if every single child in Thailand loved to read. The difference for the child, the difference perhaps for the education system, the difference for the country, if all of the inhabitants of Thailand love to read. So could you just have a quick conversation with the person next to you about what a difference it would make? Just to talk to your neighbour. For me, I much prefer it if I can hear what the audience thinks and to get some feedback from people. But I think I'm going to have to base this. I did this with a small group of people yesterday afternoon, and we ended up with a very similar list to what I'm going to put on the screen now. And for most people, when you ask them about the importance of reading, they will say that it develops the imagination. A very, very important thing. If we want people to think and to have ideas, they have to have imagination. And so reading opens so many doors to so many ideas. It gives imagination. Of course, if you read a lot, your writing improves because you get the pattern of language from reading. Obviously, you get the first pattern of language from hearing other people speak your language. But then you get an additional, much more vocabulary, a whole series of extra pattern from reading. It enables independent learning. Actually, if you are a reader, you can educate yourself, yeah? So the more that children become readers, the more they can follow their own interests. So it improves thinking. It strengthens cross-curricular achievement. One thing you learn in one area, you can see the links more easily with another area. Helps develop interest. The child who is a reader tends to be a child who's interested in lots of things because they can find out about so many things. And of course, these days, the internet provides us with such a brilliant way to find out certain things that we're interested in. Because I know the first time I used the internet, I asked it a question that books could not answer for me. I was interested in a particular history somewhere in Turkey of a particular ancient site. I had no information from books. I asked the internet and I was amazed. Within 5 clicks, I had a map of the site and some history of that site. Now, the books are sometimes much better than the internet. Sometimes the internet can be better. So it can be very, very useful. It widens and experience and understanding. It improves vocabulary. Most of us have got an awful lot of extra words from books. And if you are trying to learn English, books are incredibly important for increasing your vocabulary because, unfortunately, I think English has more words in it than any other language in the world. And one of the ways of getting your head around some of these words is through books. It increases confidence when speaking. If you can read ideas and then write your ideas and speak your ideas, it is what we call a virtuous circle. One helps the other, so you can get better and better. And the final one at the top, it opens doors. Because the child who is a reader has so much opportunity for them. And the country that is highly literate has so many opportunities. And in the future, a country will not be able to compete effectively if it hasn't got a highly literate nation. This is a quotation that is my favourite quotation about why reading is important. It is on the back of a book. I do not know if this book is available in Thailand. I hope that it is. It is called The History of Reading by Alberto Manguel. Is it available? Have you known History of... Yeah, I can see people nodding. It is a magnificent book. It is truly a good read, very entertaining, very informative. And on the back of my copy, this man is a journalist, he has written this comment about the power of reading. And to me it sums it up. Because if you think of yourself, when you're a reader, you can go above all the information that humanity has, all the ideas that human beings have come up with over the centuries, and all the great stories. And when you have, if you are not a reader, all those doors are closed to you, and you have to spend so much time, trying to pretend you can do things rather than actually being able to do them. And just one little example, we have various campaigns in the United Kingdom to encourage people to read, and some of them are in the prisons. And I was talking to a man a few weeks ago who had become a reader in prison for the first time. And his nickname is Diesel. Diesel suggests power, a diesel engine. And he looks like a man whose nickname would be Diesel. And he said to me about reading, he said, and he had a very different accent from mine. And he said, well, you see, I used to just hit people. If people tried to speak to me, I just hit them, see? Just hit them. Because that's all I was good at. So his way of dealing with human beings was to hit them. And so he ended up in prison. But in prison he learnt to read, and he said, now I understand the power of reading. And now he goes around prisons trying to make other people become readers. And he is a reading champion, for reading. Also, if you're interested in the research of this, I think this is a very important fact here. If a child has got parents that value reading, even if the parents haven't got much money, that child is at more of an advantage than having rich parents. Now, in the United Kingdom, I don't know if it's true here, but they have done research to show that if you have a very bright child whose parents are poor and a not bright child whose parents are rich, the rich child overtakes the poor child by the time the child is 6 and carries on going up if nothing else happens. But if the poor child has got parents who are readers, who encourage the child to read, that bright poor child can go on and achieve extremely well and beat the rich child completely academically. So to me, very, very important, because I spent most of my career teaching in a poor area of London, and I suppose my sympathy is with trying to help the poor children to really get on and do something, and I can see a few of you nodding, so that pleases me greatly. So my next question to you is for you to think about what turned you into a reader, because I am assuming that all of you have come today because you are readers. Now, if you can only name one thing as the greatest influence in turning you into a reader, can you just think of what that one thing is and perhaps tell the person sitting next to you what the one thing, the most powerful force was? It might be somebody in your home, it might be somebody in school, it might be a particular book, whatever it is, just think about it and just tell the person sitting next to you. Now, I'm going to ask you a number of questions. And I just want you to put up your hand, if what I've said fits you. First of all, who was turned on to reading by somebody in their home, their mother or their father or something like that? Turned on to reading in the home? About 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Who was turned on to reading by school? 1 person, 2 people. Okay. Who was turned on to reading by the library? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. About 5. Who was turned on to reading by a particular book or a particular writer, falling in love with a particular writer? Can I ask you which writer? Can you just shout out? Which writer? Judy Blume. We've got to vote for Judy Blume. Who else? A Thai writer. Say it loudly so they can hear. Right. Anyone else got a particular writer that turned them on to reading? Right. J.K. Rowling, yeah? If the audience here was in England and the audience was middle-aged, it would be Enid Blyton would have been the most significant. Now, Enid Blyton is not a great writer if you want to have the idea of the best writer, but she's probably turned more people on to reading in the world than any other human being, because it is a story that people want to read. So I've got a lot of people in the room who I don't know yet what turned them on to reading, because now the hands that I've had up don't all add up to the audience, if you see what I mean. So has anybody got anything else that turned them on to reading that they're willing to say out loud? Anybody? No. Okay. Now, I do not know, certainly when I ask this question of audiences in England, it is the home that is the most important influence in turning children into readers. And if we want our children to read, then we have to get the parents reading with the children, and we have to get the parents actually reading, showing the children that they value reading. It's no good mum saying, you get on and read, if child never sees mum getting on and reading. So, I want to spend a little bit of time on that. I'm going to put one or two things that research has told us about the importance of the home. And this is not just, this is right across the world, that it is the involvement of the parent that is the most important thing. And very interestingly, reading and the involvement of the parent in reading is absolutely central to the child's development of language. Now, this might be because when you sit with a child on your lap reading to them, you are focusing all your attention on that child for that time. And the one thing we absolutely know is that children love attention to themselves. And that bonding between the parent and the child and that development of language is so, so, so important. And we have one of the campaigns we have in Britain at the moment is called Talk to Your Baby. Because in the schools, if you ask a nursery teacher, they will tell you that the children are coming to school with not as much language as they used to have. And we have to ask ourselves why. And the answer that some people say is the television and the mobile phone and things like that. And I'll come to that in a moment. Another study, and this one I think is very, very interesting. They had some children who weren't particularly good readers. And one group of children was asked to go home and read to their parents every night. And another group of children, they just carried on trying to teach them to read in what you might call the normal way in school. The group that went home and read to their parents made much more progress than the group that were taught to read in the normal way. And you'll probably notice down the bottom there that it says it didn't matter if the parents couldn't read English or they couldn't read at all. So for English, change it to Thai. It doesn't matter if the parents can't read. What matters is that time of the child with the parents. For some strange reason, it is, if you like, the magic ingredient. Home is the greatest influence on the child. And if we are in the education service, we must remember that, because we must value what the home does and support the home in helping the child to make progress. So, I have this question. 2 years ago, we had a conference, and we had that image of the little bunny rabbit watching a plastic television, for the fact that now, I don't know what it is in Thailand, but in the United Kingdom, most children now have televisions in their bedrooms. A lot of them don't just have televisions, they have DVD players, they have wall-to-wall electronic, I call it gubbins. It is a word, a collective bit of slang for things. They have lots of electronic things in their bedrooms. And as you can see here, what they found was that it was keeping their children away from the parents and keeping them away from their brothers and sisters. A few years ago, when I was a teacher, I taught a group of children who had very little English. They were all born in England, they were all English, but they weren't very good at their language, and I interviewed them. And I found out that in their homes they had between 4 and 8 televisions per home, and they never spoke to each other, as far as I could tell. They did not sit down and eat together. I asked one girl, she said, well, we tried it once, miss, at Christmas, but we ended up throwing the food at each other. Oh, right, okay. So they sit separately in their rooms and they watch things. Now, the trouble with watching things is that it's not interactive. You don't speak back to the machine speaks to you. So it doesn't develop your language so much. Because unless you make a conscious effort to learn the language that you're hearing, it doesn't, as it were, isn't so strong. So the question, obviously is important. What do we do in this highly electronic age? So we've got some top tips about electronic gadgets. And the first one I think is very important. We must not see the internet as enemy. Because if we see it as enemy, we've lost before we begin. Because if we think that somehow everybody is going to turn their televisions off, is going to not be connected, not have their mobile phones, that is not going to happen. So therefore we've got to use what's there and not to, I said, to demonize them. Because if we tell the children not to have these things, they will want them all the more. Nothing attracts a child more than the word no. Because obviously then, there was a little boy in the lift this morning, and there was an emergency bell. And as soon as his father told him not to press the emergency bell, obviously the little boy spent all of his time in the lift trying to reach it, because it was the only interesting thing in the lift, yes? So we have to embrace them, if you like, and to show that we can use the internet to advertise reading, to make reading attractive. And obviously Dr. Sirikorn was making many of those points before. So the show how reading supports new technology, and it can be fun. There's some great websites, and I'm sure you've got similar ones in Thailand. We've got one called Cool Reads, where teenagers have built their own website telling other teenagers what great reads are. So let's use the internet as a way of helping the children. But, and this is a key point, don't let young children have a TV in the bedroom. Because what the researchers have found is that the child keeps on turning the television on, and then they don't sleep properly because they've got this thing making a noise all the time, and of course you can't control what the child is watching. There is research now in America that has said, and it's good research, that says you shouldn't actually watch television with children before the age of 2. I don't know if that is so, and certainly there's an awful lot of people in the United Kingdom who would argue differently. But certainly in the United Kingdom it is agreed that if a young child is watching television, they should have an adult with them, and the adult should talk to them about what is going on the television and encourage the child to talk. And obviously the best of children's programs do try and do that thing. So I just wondered whether I think somewhere in your packs you've got a television handout about the sort of top tips about television. And I suppose my question is, do you agree with it? And does anybody have a top tip for young people about, say, mobile phones and the internet? I tell you, I'm going to be terribly rude here and say I've found the use of mobile phones when people are in meetings and at conferences very strange here. And I'm terribly glad to say that you have been a superb audience and people have not answered their mobile phones. And apparently I was warned before I came that this was perfectly normal in Thailand. To me, I think it is very important that the mobile phone is a new thing. It is not a tradition for any of us, because none of us were born, as it were, holding a mobile phone and a mother told us what grandmother did with a mobile phone. The mobile phone is new, and so we must use it because it is a magnificent communication tool. But also, if we're not careful, the mobile phone will interrupt communication. It will stop face-to-face communication. Face-to-face communication is the most powerful communication. And therefore, I think it is important to try and have, as it were, ways of using the mobile phone. I know if I go out with my friends in England for a meal, and it is a formal meal, I don't want them to have their mobile phones on. Because if you're having a conversation and then suddenly there's another conversation, another conversation, another conversation. So I think, across the world we perhaps need to start thinking about what the mobile phone, to use it carefully. Because, as I say, it is a wonderful thing, a very useful thing, but also incredibly disruptive. And when you are at work, the emails that come in all the time. They have done studies, haven't they, about the fact that people have stopped working properly at all because they're spending all their time checking if the next emails come in. Or some people have that thing on the screen that tells you the next time an email comes. And so instead of you doing what you think's important, you end up answering other people's questions all the time, somebody else's agenda. And so I think we have to think about, as it were, what the electronic world does to us. Now, I was going to ask you to discuss this amongst yourselves, but maybe I'm going to leave it to you to sort of perhaps discuss at another time. One of the things I think is really important if we're trying to get young people to read is to find out what they actually think about it. And we carried out a survey of 8,000 children in schools in England, 98 schools, and we wanted them to tell us actually what they thought about reading, whether they liked it, whether they thought it was less important than other things, and all of the results are on our website. And you can also get hold of the questionnaire. So if you wanted to translate it into Thai and alter it a bit, obviously you could. And it's been a very useful exercise. What we found out from the children that we asked was that half of them said they enjoyed reading. And quite a lot of them thought they were really quite good at reading. And that would fit in with statistics in the United Kingdom. In the United Kingdom, most children are good at reading. But recently it has been found that they don't like it as much as they used to. There is a national literacy strategy, and some people, in fact a lot of people, would argue that the focus on helping children to learn to read has taken off the focus from helping them enjoy reading. And if you're not careful, they can do it, but they don't want to, if you see what I mean. Certainly the latest of the big surveys showed that. But our children, the ones we surveyed, most of them enjoyed it. We defined reading widely. We're not just talking about books. We're not just talking about novels and stories. We're talking about factual books, history books, magazines, websites, text messages. So the broad range of reading. And we found that 11% of our survey didn't like it at all. And if we'd had a survey, these were all done in schools that are part of our project, Reading Connects. I think if we'd gone to schools beyond the project, that figure would go up from 11% to 20%. But then the ones who didn't like it said they'd like it more if the books were shorter, if they had more pictures in them, and if they're about things that interested them. And I think that last point is incredibly important, because if a child is going to want to read a book, it has to be about something that they want to read about. And therefore we've got to find out what they are interested in and make certain we've got those books. And that's why libraries are such a wonderful thing, because obviously we can't afford to buy the books that our children are interested in, but we can take our child to the library and borrow those books. Interestingly, the majority of the children said it was both home and school that had taught them to read, and also that it was the job of both home and school to teach them to read. But, and this is what really interested us, half of them said they never or almost never talked about reading with their family. Now these are parents, most of whom would be spending any number of hours at the weekend driving their children here, driving their children there, making certain this, making certain that, and yet they weren't talking about reading to them. And these parents, most of them, would want their children to do well in school, and yet they weren't doing that thing that would actually make the biggest difference, encouraging them to read. And the middle one here, very, very interesting. A quarter of the pupils said they never saw their father spending any time reading. Children, especially little children, copy what their parents do. If they don't see their parents reading, then they're not very liable to read themselves. And whether we as women like it or not, Dad is incredibly important in the children's eyes as the role model, because quite often they don't see Dad as much as they see Mum, and so what Dad does when they do see Dad is very, very important. And again, most of them said it was their mother who had supported them in their reading more than their father. And so from this survey, we knew that what we had to do was to try and get a sort of reading culture in the schools, we had to get the boys to read more, and we had to support reading in the home. What I wanted to suggest that might be useful for you is to try and work together so that the librarians, the parents and the school would work together to see if they could ways of getting that school to be really a reading school so that all the children value reading. And so what I'm suggesting is that you might want to look at www.readingconnects.org.uk, because what we've done with Reading Connects is to get together all the organisations in England who are interested in promoting reading in schools, including lots of library organisations, and to sit everybody around a table and to say, OK, if we want to turn our children into lovers of reading, how do we do it? And we've discussed this, and all the ideas that we've come up with, we've put up on our website. But not just the supposed experts like myself, because actually, I'm not the expert that I was. When I was a teacher, I had to find out every day whether my ideas worked. Now, a lot of the time, I'm sitting at a desk in an office with no children in front of me. And you can make mistakes when you're sitting in a desk in an office because you think your ideas are good, when actually they're pretty stupid. You try them out in a real classroom and they don't work. Yeah? So the people who are the real experts are the teachers in the schools who are dealing with this thing all the time. And so we've asked the schools to tell us their brightest ideas, what has worked best. And we've put all the ideas up on the website, and if you want to access them, hopefully some of them would be useful to you. And all the research is on the website, lots and lots of ideas. I want you to think about a school that you know, either that your child goes to, that you teach at, or for whatever reason you know this school. And pretend you're walking into the school, you're walking into the front foyer of the school, you're walking along the corridors, you're walking into the classrooms. And I want you to think, what's the image of reading in the school? Or has reading got an image at all? Because if you think about the power of reading and the fact that it can turn children into much better learners, much more civilized people, can turn a country into a much more powerful country if all its citizens are good readers, then we must value reading very highly. And in my home, when I was a child, books were everywhere, because my parents valued books. And so, of course, as a child, I valued books because I saw what books could do. And our schools, I think, should do the same. One of the things that we've got in, this is, and you can download this off the internet, this is a little booklet that we've done for primary schools. There's another one for secondary schools. And inside the little booklet is an audit for people to think about the school that they work in or that they know. How important is reading in the whole school environment? And if you walk into the school and you're not aware of the importance of reading just by looking at the walls, then you'd have to maybe put yourself in emergent, or maybe not even there at all, right? And then we've got a whole list of different things, and obviously you'd have to have a list that was correct for Thai schools. This was done for English schools. But we've got, further on, we've got links with the local library as well as links with the school library and so on. And the idea is it's full of lots of suggestions about what you can do for those areas to raise the profile of reading. And the schools that have used this have said they found it very, very useful, because it's made them think, oh, what with this and this and this is a good idea, and we're already doing that, so well done to us. But wait a minute, that's a good idea. We could do this, we could do that. So what I wanted to suggest to you is that, let's say you're working with your school to try and make reading more visible. You might want to set up a display in the main foyer of students, staff and parents and other everybody connected with the school as role models. I want to give you an example. A few years ago, in the National Year of Reading, I went to a school in Sheffield. Sheffield is in the north of England, and the particular school I went to was in a very poor area. And it was a horrible-looking building. When you looked at the building, you think, ugh, I do not want to go to school there, thank you very much. But when I walked inside the building, there was the most magnificent display in the front foyer. And it was a display of enormous posters. And it was not pictures of what I call the well-washed of the school. So it wasn't the head teacher and the head girl and the chair of governors, the sort of respectable people of the school. It was the normal people of the school, the children from the local housing estate, the cooks, the cleaners, the school keepers, one or two of the teachers. And each of them was holding their favourite read. So a great big poster of them, and underneath a few words saying why their choice was wonderful. So one boy is holding his football magazine. Another person is holding a comic. Another person is holding a novel. Another person, an autobiography. What they know, their special read. So somebody would probably have J.K. Rowling. Somebody else, would have Roald Dahl. Whatever was the reader, Enid Blyton, that meant something to them. And I thought, what a powerful message, because then we're saying to the children that reading is important to everybody in the community. Because if we're not careful, it's just the teachers who mention reading. And in fact, often in England, it's the English teacher who goes on about reading, and the librarian who goes on about reading, and the rest of them hardly mention it at all. So it's this very important thing of getting everybody to show the importance of reading. And the great thing about the computers we've got in schools is that we can use them to advertise reading, because the children are probably better than the staff at creating screensavers. They know how to do this, to create great images on the screen. Well, if you ask the children to create screensavers that promote their favourite reads, then you've got a permanent display up in classrooms of a whole series of different reads, whilst the computers are not in use. And if you've got one of those intranets in a school, then, it can be right around the school. Involve the children in doing a sort of makeover of the school library or the school foyer, because children are much more liable to be interested if they think they've been involved. If we're not careful, we keep on doing things to children. We tell them what is good for them. They have to sit quietly, and they probably don't agree, but they just sit there looking polite, yeah? But it might be an idea to let a group of children perhaps do a display of sports books, or books that boys have chosen, books that girls have chosen. Because another problem is, if we're doing the displays, the chances are that it will be women doing the display. And women will do a feminine display, because that is what you do. You choose the colours and the look of things that is right for your eyes. Now that's fine as long as you're trying to get through to the girls. But if you're trying to get through to the boys, then you're going to need somebody to make it a bit more masculine. Yeah? And therefore, if we involve the children, then they can make the things appeal to them. You might want to use this idea, the Get Caught Reading poster. The idea of this is that somebody with a picture of themselves and some writing, says, what they thought about reading perhaps when they were a child, what their favourite reads were when they were little, what they're reading now, and a few reading recommendations. And this can work really well. And if it's a teacher, and if the teacher has a picture of them as a child, all the children will want to look at what the teacher looked like as a small child. And immediately it gets the conversation going about reading. And if you have a whole wall full of these recommendation posters, it can look really great. I've seen some wonderful ones. And of course you could include parents in this. You could include a whole lot of sort of people related to the school. Now, extreme reading, you're going to find this very strange indeed. But the idea of extreme reading, there is something very daft. I don't know if it's reached Thailand. It's called extreme ironing. Right? The idea is you have to take an ironing board and an iron and be seen to be ironing somewhere very, very stupid indeed. So there's pictures of men on surfboards ironing, people up mountains ironing. The pictures that people have taken of people ironing are unbelievable, right? Now, some schools will do the same, but with reading. So the idea is, where can you be caught reading in a very, very strange place indeed? The children have got the cameras on their mobile phones. They can take the pictures with ease, and suddenly you can have a mad display of reading, about reading, that is exciting, entertaining, and again, just gets the conversation going about reading. If you are a reader, think for a moment about the books that you read. And you will probably realise that for most of us who read, we read the books that other people have recommended to us. You say, oh, that's a really good read, and you jot the name down and you go and find it. Yeah? Certainly in the United Kingdom, they reckon 67% of reading choices are because somebody else said it was a good read. That somebody might be somebody on the television, because we have sort of programmes promoting reading on the television. But certainly we had the big read last year on the television, and books that had hardly sold a single copy for years got onto the big read and suddenly went into the bestsellers. As soon as people sort of hear that something's good, they'll go out and buy it. The idea of speed dating is, say all the children, or if you wanted to do it on a parents' evening with a parents' reading group, everybody has to bring in there a favourite read. And then you have 1 minute to explain to a partner why your book is a great read. And then a whistle goes or something, and then you have to talk to somebody else. Now, it's really good because it gets people talking about reading, and it gets the listeners thinking, oh, wait a minute, that one might be, the right read for me. Schools that have tried this have found it just incredibly successful. You might want to have a school magazine. I don't know if Thai schools have magazines. Do Thai schools have magazines? So parent magazines? I can see a few people nodding. Well, you might want to include a sort of recommended read section in that, where the children are doing some great reads, but also the parents are doing recommended reads. Everything to get the conversation going about reading. And of course, if that newsletter is electronic, again, that's great. And you can have images of the books so easily on something like that. You might want to set up a range of reading groups. Lots of schools have found these really successful. Quite often, actually, strangely enough, really successful to have one with the staff. Because if the staff get together, the teachers, the librarian and so on get together, and perhaps, say the science assistants and things like that. We have something called teaching assistants in the UK as well. They get together in the lunchtime, they have conversations about reading, and it helps to encourage everybody to be enthusiastic. You could organise your own big read. It was incredibly successful in Britain when they did the big read. People suddenly started talking about reading right across the country. This was done by the BBC. But some schools then did their own big read, because the way a big read worked, it worked on the television, they said viewers had to send in their favourite read. And then they emailed in their favourite reads, and then they counted it all up, and it came down to then the 100 best books that people had chosen. Then the nation voted on those 100, got it down to 20, and then famous people, one person per book, then came on the television and said why their choice was the best book ever, and then the nation voted. Now, in the United Kingdom, we ended up voting for Lord of the Rings. I didn't agree with that because I don't particularly like Lord of the Rings, but that doesn't matter. What it did was it got the conversation going about reading, and lots of libraries sort of joined in. Lots of people went to their libraries wanting to join in reading groups, and it has been really successful. Another thing you might want to do is to set up buddying schemes where older people help younger people. Now, the buddies could be parents, the buddies could be members of staff, or the buddies could be other children. Because as you can see from the image on the screen, a bit ago, the mother of these two children sent me a picture of her husband teaching the little girl when she was a baby to read. But now, of course, the little girl is helping her brother to read because she understands how, because her parents bothered to teach her, and now she's teaching her younger brother. And some schools have done a very interesting thing. If you've got children who are quite old and still not very good at reading, it can be very difficult to teach, say, a 14-year-old girl or boy who can't really read properly how to read. Because it's childish, isn't it, to not be able to read. But what they did was they got these 14-year-old girls and they said, we want you to teach the children down the road at the little school how to read. And we want to help you know how to teach small children to read. So we're going to teach you phonics. And therefore, they managed to teach the older girls phonics, and they didn't think it was childish because they were going to help small children. And the girls themselves became readers, and they helped the little children. So it can work extremely well. I wanted to play you a video now. We had a competition last year for the Best Reading Connect school, and we had a primary school that won and a secondary school that won. So this is the primary school. These are very young children, only up to the age of 7 at this particular school.
Well, reading for pleasure generally, I think, is something that has actually been sort of lost in a lot of schools, which is a real shame because some children are getting the skills to read, but they're not actually reading for pleasure or going out to libraries and investigating new authors. So as a school, we wanted to make sure that we had a good balance, that we were obviously teaching the children skills to be able to acquire knowledge about text, but also to share the enjoyment of literature, because there's so much out in shops and libraries. It's so fantastic for children.
They choose a story, read a bit to me, and it was just lovely. It's really interesting, and it's amazing to see the different levels of the children.
For children to just engage with reading in a really fun way is the most important thing of all, really, isn't it?
Involving other people as well, involving their parents.
Yeah,
and
involving
friends.
parents. We had our secretary involved. I mean, I'm a teacher, Kit's classroom assistant. You know, it's just a big mix of people really sort of working together to promote reading is fun.
And by each class having its own author based around our interest in books, I think that's increased children's interest as well.
We've got a group of about sort of 6 or 7 parents along with us, and we've had help from our secretary and a couple of our classroom assistants as well, and we just sort of chose stories that either we had in school or that we thought would lend themselves really well, and we just went away and thought of various props we could use. This is the hand surprise one, and then we've got sort of a backdrop for reenacting the story. We've got finger puppets, we've got fruits that are all sort of nice and tactile, and then we always include a non-fiction book as well to sort of tune into children who might want to find out more in a very factual way.
We always try to incorporate some visits to the library every year, or as today we had the librarian come to us with our reception class to tell them about the library, because again that's a fantastic resource on the children's doorstep.
So sad, because when it came to dancing, it was really very... I'm just kind of a little taster session before the actual visit to the library, and then they can come and actually see what's in the library and what sort of things that they can get. We've actually already had a few classes from the school come, and when I came to the school this morning, they were all saying, "Hello, Catherine," so that was good that they were at least remembered who I was and where I was from.
And I read really recommendations from my friends and family as well. So I'm doing what I expect children to be doing. The staff room will share what we've read, and again, with the book swap, we can actually, say, there we are, you try it now and see what you feel.
At the moment, I'm reading through the Da Vinci Code, which I've been recommended.
Bernard Cornwell. I've just finished one of it. It's got a new Viking book out, and I'm within that much of the ending at the moment. It's all fighting and daring do and brave deeds, and I feel very enthused by it.
I would recommend Mr. Jeep and the Ghost Train because it's a really funny and good book. Daisy Meadows' book, because nearly every single girl in our class loved these books. Quentin Blake, because I like the way he uses lines to make his hair, makes him really effective. My mum didn't really know what I wanted, so she just gets different books, and I just read them for pleasure. I like reading funny poems, normal poems, and chapter books.
One of the interesting things that primary school did, and I would never have thought of it myself, I don't know, do your classes in Thai schools have names so that each class has a different name? Like sort of in England, they're often boring things like 1D or something like that, so that you can tell which class is which. Well, what they did was they changed the names of the classes, so that each class was named after a living English author. Children's author. So one Michael Rosen, or you could have, he's not living now, but say two Roald Dahl, and so on. Now, the amazing thing was that this made the children read much more. They wanted to read the books written by the person who was their classroom name, but not just the children, the parents wanted to read them. And then the parents got very competitive. And they started saying, our author's better than your author. And they went onto the internet and found out who'd sold most books and all of this, and got very sort of, sniffy about it, and really, brilliant little idea that started the conversation going about reading. Another suggestion is for schools to make parents feel welcome. Years and years ago, in some schools in the United Kingdom, parents weren't made to feel welcome at all. Some schools even had a line on them that said on the playground, no parent past this point. Literally, no parent past this point. Schools need to work together with the parents. If we are going to help the children, we all need to work together. So some schools now have got a particular area for parents, so that when the parents come in, there's a room for them to go in. There's computers in there, that parents can be helped to learn about computing if they don't know, etc. And at certain times of the day, they know there'll be a member of staff there who can help them. And of course, one of the things that we can do there is to help the parents who aren't confident with reading with their children to read with their children. Because if you were read to as a child, you know how to read with a child. But if you weren't read to as a child at home, how would you know how to do it with your own child? You wouldn't even think of doing it, probably. So it's this thing of helping parents. And one of the things I wanted to suggest is this running of storytelling sessions. And storytelling is quite difficult. And you might want to help the parents to tell stories, to read stories to children. And I don't know if you know the idea of story sacks, where the little characters that are in the book, you make some of them out of felt and cardboard and things like that. So it's almost like a puppet show that goes with the storytelling. And of course, Thailand is expert in puppet shows, and again, it helps to tell the story. We've also got another book that you might find the idea of it useful, to suggest your publishers to do something similar. There is a famous writer, Jacqueline Wilson. Do you know Jacqueline Wilson? Certainly girls in the United Kingdom tend to know Jacqueline Wilson. She's very popular. She is at the moment the poet, the children's laureate, and she is promoting reading for children and this year. And what she has said that she wants to do is to promote reading aloud. And so she's, with one of the publishers, made this book. And it's a brilliant book, because what she's done in it, and it only costs £1, so that's 60 baht. So it's very, very cheap. And the publishers have done this at cost price, so they're making no profit out of this. They're doing it because, they are trying to promote reading, because the more people who read, the more books they'll sell in the long run. Now, what this book does is tell the parent about 70 great children's stories. So I just turn to the first one. It suggests, this is for 0 to 5-year-olds, that you should read them The Gruffalo. And so it just gives you the pictures that you'll see that go with the Gruffalo. And then enjoy this sample extract from one of the most popular picture books ever. This extract gives a real taste of the rhythm and humour in the Gruffalo. Try it out with your child today. And then there's a teeny little bit from the book. A mouse took a stroll through the deep dark wood. A fox saw the mouse, and the mouse looked good. Where are you going to, little brown mouse? Come and have lunch in my underground house. And, like all good children's books, it's using repetition, it's using rhyme, it's getting the child to hear that story. Now, I think I was told that Thai audiences wouldn't necessarily be terribly responsive because people are used to listening very, very politely and not sort of answering back, as it were. And I'm going to do something now that I was told it wouldn't work, but I'm just a fool and I always like to try things. So I wanted to do some storytelling with you, and it's this idea of helping parents and helping ourselves to tell stories better. And the idea is to have a little picture diagram that tells you the story. Now, on your next page, you've got this story. This is a very good way to improve your English, because this is a child's story and it's very, very repetitive. But you have to do, this is the bit you're not going to like, you have to do the arm motions as well. Yeah? And perhaps if you can hold the microphone for me, thank you. So, it goes like this. So, once upon a time, there was a little boy called Charlie who lived in a big, big city. So, can you do that with me? Once upon a time, there was a little boy called Charlie who lived in a big, big city. One day, when he woke up, his mother said to him, "Take this bag to your grandmother's." So, one day, say it with me, one day, when he woke up, his mother said to him, "Take this bag to your grandmother's." Into the bag she put a slice of cheese, a loaf of bread, and a square of chocolate. So, into the bag she put a slice of cheese, a loaf of bread, and a square of chocolate. Next he walked and he walked and he walked. So next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to a bridge. Meow. So next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to a bridge. Meow. There was a cat, a mean cat, a lean cat. "I'm hungry," said the cat. "What have you got in your bag?" So let's try that bit. Next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to a bridge. There was a cat, a lean cat, a mean cat. "I'm hungry," said the cat. "What have you got in your bag?" Charlie replied that he had a slice of cheese, a loaf of bread, but he kept the chocolate hidden. So let's try that bit. Charlie replied that he had a slice of cheese, a loaf of bread, but he kept the chocolate hidden. Now the next bit's more difficult because it's not on the screen. Next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to a pond. Quack. So next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to a pond. Quack. There was a duck, a lovely black and white duck. "I'm hungry," said the duck. "What have you got in your bag?" So let's try that bit. Next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to a pond. There was a duck, a lovely black and white duck. "I'm hungry," said the duck. "What have you got in your bag?" Charlie replied that he'd got a loaf of bread, but he kept the chocolate hidden. Oh, sorry, I missed out the bit, didn't I?
I missed out the bit that says, "I'll have the cheese, please," said the cat, and he ate it all up, okay? So then, "I'll have the bread, please," said the duck, and he ate it all up. Next he walked, I'll now do the rest of it so you can just see how the story ends. Next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to a clock tower. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. There he saw not one, not two, but 3 scruffy pigeons. "We're hungry," said the pigeons. "What you got in your bag?" Unfortunately, he only had the chocolate left. Luckily, there were lots of breadcrumbs, so he gave the breadcrumbs to the pigeons and they ate them all up. Next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to a crossroads. He looked all around him. No one was there. "I'm hungry," said Charlie. "What have I got in my bag?" Charlie saw the chocolate and he ate it all up. Next he walked and he walked and he walked until he came to his grandmother's house. There was his grandmother. "I'm hungry," said the grandmother. "What have you got in your bag?" Unfortunately, there was only the chocolate paper in the bag, but luckily our grandmother had cooked I don't know, pizza and chips for tea, or something like that. Okay, so the idea of the story is to help the parent and the child get the flow of language, get the joy of story. And if we had the time, we could have practiced this, and then you could have all been the perfect storyteller. Because a year ago, I was sitting in the audience, and somebody did this. And I had to do all the movements, and I thought, oh, that's brilliant, because this is so powerful. And so now, if I find myself with a little child to look after, I tell them that story. And I feel quite good about myself. I've got quite good at being the cat, yeah? And the child, of course, can tell the story. And the idea is that the parent or the teacher, the older person, ceases to tell the story and lets the young person tell the story. And in doing this, we're giving the children the pattern of language, the enjoyment of story, and it's entertaining, it's fun. And it is a very, very powerful. And I've seen it work with children of all ages. And the interesting thing also is that the children who this was first done with were very, very poor at writing, very, very poor at sort of understanding story. And yet all of them spend hours and hours and hours and hours watching stories on the television, on their videos. And one child, she had 2 copies of Cinderella. Is the story of Cinderella known in Thailand? Yeah. She had 2 copies of Cinderella, but when asked, she could not tell the story. And the man looked at the videos and found that the videos told the story mainly in pictures and conversation, but not narration. And of course, to tell a story, you have to have the narrator's voice. And to be able to write a story yourself, you have to have a story in the head. And the idea of these stories is, of course, that once you've got a story like that, you can change it around. You can change Charlie's name. You can turn it into a name that you know. You can make the city Bangkok. You can change grandmother into something completely different. And in the end, this is a quest story. There are very, very few stories in the world. I think they say there are only 7 stories, and they're just lots of different versions of the same story. The story we've just done is the same as Lord of the Rings. It's going from place to place and different problems happen, and finally you get to the end and there's some sort of resolution. And it's just a way of giving people confidence. Anyway, I was very impressed with you as an audience, and it was a lie that you wouldn't do it, so there we are. Anyway, so a few sort of top tips. If you've got children aged 5 to 9, read yourself. This may sound a bit odd as my first top tip, but set a good example. Let them see that you value books and you have them in your home. And obviously not just books, magazines, newspapers. I've noticed on the public transport in Bangkok that people don't read on the trains, in London, everybody reads on the trains, nearly everybody, you know. I'm obsessed, I suppose, by reading, so I spend my time looking at what people are reading anywhere I go in the world, and if they are reading. And I was just amazed that people would sit in these, you know, boring bits of public transport and not read. Because a good story, when you're on the tube or, you know, reading the newspaper, it passes that boring 10 minutes and turns it into something good. And the most important thing in the middle, make time to read. No, reading that bedtime story, just 10 minutes every day. And I know we say we're very, very busy these days, and there's this and there's that, but you're not telling me we can't all find 10 minutes to read a story. And I'd like to add into what I've got there, turn your mobile phone off so the child knows that it's got 10 minutes for them. Because so often now, as I'm travelling on the bus to work, I see a little child trying to get its parents' attention, and the little child can't get the parent's attention because the parent is on the mobile phone, you know? And you're thinking, come on, give that child just a little bit of time. Do people have pushchairs here? With the children in pushchairs? Actually, the pavements aren't very good. You'd have no hope with a pushchair. In England, the children, when they're little, are in pushchairs on the pavements. And when I was a child, the pushchair, you faced your parents. Now, the children face away from their parents. Very important, if you can, to get a pushchair, the child faces you. Then you can talk to them. Otherwise, you're not communicating with the child. And, of course, to visit your library. Because however much money we earn, we can get to that library, we can get the books out of the library, and encourage your child to be, you know, a library, you know, to use that library. If you've got a child who really, really, really doesn't take to reading, you might want to try this idea where you help the child create their own book about themselves or about something that they're interested in. Because we found with a lot of children in England who haven't taken to reading, if they can read about themselves and if they can read about what they're really interested in, if they can see themselves in the book, then that can convert them into reading. And of course, if they can't write, but they dictate to you what they want in their book, and then suddenly there are their words, and after a bit they will learn to read those words, and it just makes them feel good about themselves and that they can read. And I've known quite a few children for whom that has made a really big difference. The older they get, obviously, the more difficult it is. And teenagers, it's very, very difficult. There's so many conflicting things when you're a teenager, so much worry about image. So, and we found, I don't know if it's the same in Thailand, but people say that teenagers stop talking. They just go whoa, 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 whoa when they're sort of about 14. You ask them a question and they go bleh, and you think, was that an answer? And you have to live with that for a bit, and you just have to smile and be patient and think, well, they will grow out of this in a few years' time. So I think it is natural for children to not read quite so much when they become teenagers. But still, set that good example. Be reading yourself. Try not to nag too much, because obviously nagging people, telling them off, never made anybody really do anything very much. And show them what reading is good for. And try and encourage them to talk about reading themselves, the comics, the magazines, the websites. Maybe they might be into manga. I know some of the manga comics can be a bit violent, but some of them are actually very effective in helping children, be interested in reading. Obviously, encourage your library to link up with the library service. And if you can, provide good books for the parents. But I just wanted to show you this book. These books have been specially produced in England, in the UK recently. All the big publishers have got together, along with organisations like my own, to work together to get some books out for adults who don't like reading very much, who either don't see themselves as readers. This book is by a famous person, Richard Branson, and it's all about how you can be successful. Now, Richard Branson is dyslexic. He's always found reading difficult. He's what's known as a self-made man. He's a multi-millionaire, and he's come from nothing. And this book, One Just Do It, is his, as it were, tips on how you can be successful in life. This book has sold extremely well. As you can probably see on the screen, the book is, it's quite thin. I can show, yes, it's quite thin, right? It's got quite big text. And the sentences are quite simple. There is a brief that the writers have to write to. And so some very famous writers have written these either stories or advice. They've written them in simple sentences. It's what's known as a quick read. Now, if reading isn't terribly common as a sort of seen as an entertaining pastime in Thailand, you might want to try and encourage publishers to do some quick reads for everybody. So there's something that you could read, a good story, some short stories or little sort of novellas, but relatively simply written. There's another one called The Team that's about football. It's brilliantly written. It's written by a journalist, and there's some great stories in it. And perhaps school libraries could, worry about having books for the parents as well, or encourage the parents to go to the library where they, can get books for themselves. And obviously keep information about how to join your local library in a school so that everybody is encouraged to read. Just wanted to do a little bit on linking up with the library. This idea of finding out what the library can offer. Now obviously TK Park has got a vast amount of things to offer. I don't suppose you've got that many libraries in Bangkok of such quality, but certainly you've got one that is clearly magnificent. In the United Kingdom, we've got something called Got Kids Get Reading, and we've also got the Summer Reading Challenge. And I just wanted to do a little bit about both of those. The idea of Got Kids Get Reading is to encourage parents who probably don't see themselves as being very good at reading to read with their child. So the sorts of book I just showed, the quick read book would be one that would be sort of used to try and offer books to the parents and to the children. So the collection has got books for parents and children. And it's to help the parents become more successful. And they're trying to sort of say, sharing books will help your children enjoy reading. So what this scheme includes is sort of book collections, little sort of starter packs, reading diaries for people to note down their reading in, some library visits, some discussions, some storytelling, reading clubs and so on. And this is something that was done in children's centres, which are sort of special areas for that parents would often go to with their children. And the library people went down to the children's centre. I think if we want to help people get into reading, we've got to remember that for a lot of people, they won't walk into a library. It's not their world. And we need to create safe space for people, and we go to them rather than thinking that they will come to us. And this is the idea of this particular approach. And you've got some quotations here from some of the parents who were involved, and they're all very touching in their way. This one in the middle where this woman has said, "I have looked at books for my children for the very first time." Or, "For the first time my son has picked up a book and run to me to ask for it to be read." Because, of course, if a parent isn't a good reader, a child very quickly understands that their parents can't read. And then they start to see that other people's parents can read, and there is that sort of lack of respect for their parent that perhaps they should have. And schemes like this have very much helped people to feel better about themselves. And as this one person said, this has been a lovely chance to read books for myself. So it's not just for the children, it's for the parents themselves. And what the libraries are also doing is to sort of saying to the parents, if they're interested in extending their education, then they can go on to courses at further education college. And sometimes the courses are actually run in the library, because for a lot of parents, the library is less scary than the education place. A little bit about the Summer Reading Challenge. I know that the British Council is going to be doing the Summer Reading Challenge, not just with the children who come to the to the British Council's school, but also with one or two of the local schools. The Summer Reading Challenge has been incredibly successful in the United Kingdom. And it's this idea, we have a long holiday. The children have 6 weeks from school. And in those 6 weeks, they're supposed to read 6 books of their choice. And they then get all sorts of awards. And there's all sorts of things to encourage them in the libraries to read these books. And the Summer Reading Challenge has been very, very successful indeed. And so 600,000 children take part. Now, that's an awful lot of children. And 91% of the libraries in the United Kingdom take part in it. And this just sums up some of the things that the Summer Reading Challenge does for the children. And so it makes most of them want to read more. It's 77% felt that they were better readers after the challenge, and 40% felt they were a lot better. So it increases the children's confidence. And this year's challenge is called the Reading Mission, and it's particularly linked up with sort of spy stories. And there's a great new book that I'm sure great new film that's coming out called Stormbreaker. And it's the film of the Anthony Horowitz book, Stormbreaker. And I'm sure this is going to be the new sort of J.K. Rowling come sort of Harry Potter series. The franchise is to make all of these spy stories by Anthony Horowitz into a film series, and there's going to be 10 films in the series. And so again, I think that you can probably find that will be very successful. And one thing that you might want to try with your children is to get the DVD of the film when it comes out, and the book. Get the book in Thai, and buy it in English if you want the children to read English, and then watch the film, first of all, obviously, with the Thai subtitles up so you can understand what's going on, and then change it to the English subtitles if you're interested in learning the English, and obviously read the story at the same time, because DVD is brilliant for helping you learn language. Because to be able to switch from your own language to the language you're learning, and the confidence in one builds confidence in the other. I know that myself because I've been teaching myself Turkish, which is, well, from my perspective, a remarkably difficult language to learn. But learning via DVD is incredibly useful. And so you might want to sort of think about that. Just wanted to finish with a little bit on boys. There were remarkably few men in the audience today, and my experience is around the world that it is the women that try and get people to read. And if we're not careful, reading becomes something that boys think isn't so much for them. And so we have this project called Reading Champions. And as you can see, we've chosen a very masculine image for school reading champions. And it is working incredibly well. We've got over 500 schools now that have actually joined Reading Champions, and quite a few that use the ideas but don't join the scheme. It's completely free for a school to join, and everything that I'm showing you is downloadable from the website. We're focusing on the boys because, as I say, we have more of a problem getting boys to read and men to read than we do with girls. But you can use exactly the same ideas with the girls, just adapt them for the girls. But we save the national recognition for the boys. So when I asked a group of teachers yesterday what puts boys off reading, the first answer I got was from one man who just said, it's for girls. We asked the children that in our survey. And actually, they didn't say that they thought that reading was for girls. But if we're not careful, it does seem to be feminine. And so we have to be careful not to present it as such to the boys. We've got here a list of the things that probably put some people off. I'm not going to go through all of these, you'll be pleased to know. But it's this idea of not giving people choice and telling them they always have to be silent and they have to read what we ask them to read, rather than letting children perhaps choose what they want to read. And the last one there, thou must cultivate an air of being uncool. All readers shall be slightly smelly, unpopular and unattractive. If we're not careful, that's the image that reading has. It's of the boring person who doesn't do things. And obviously we've got to sell reading as something that is active, interesting, and sort of will make you into the sort of person that everybody wants to be with. We asked a lot of boys what they thought about reading. And we asked them who were their celebrities, who were important to them,
what they liked doing, what their 10 hobbies were, and what their sort of, who the most important people were who were as role models. That was the top 10 groups at the end. And as you can see, we got a vast range of different people. So when we collated the ideas from 704 boys who had bothered to write something down against the top 10 celebrities, we had 281 people named as a top celebrity. But at the top of that, inevitably, it seems, footballers. Yeah? And a few girls, so one was a page 3 model. One of our popular newspapers always has a sort of semi-nude woman on page 3, and so that came up as well. And the hobbies, sport came first. Girls were quite some way down the line, and again, sport was top for the people that they would admire. On the screen here, the photographs, the man at the top there is Stephen. He runs Reading Champions, and he's standing with a top model there, so he's looking very smug. The bottom picture, you might recognise the older man is Sven Eriksson, who is no longer the leader of the England football team. And the man next to him, I also work with, that's Jim, and he runs something called Reading the Game, because we have a whole project that is connecting football and reading. And basically, all the bullet points here are things that attract boys and men to reading. So peers, people the same age as them, role models, very important. Having some ownership, some responsibility, being asked what you think, that they like to do stuff. That means they want it to be active. They want to know what the point is. They want to know, if I read this, what's the benefit, as it were? What am I going to get? They want rewards. They want competition, and they want people to say they're wonderful, the male ego. Yeah? So, what we came up with, and it has worked very well, is bronze champions, silver champions, and gold champions. And this doesn't just work with boys in school. Amazingly enough, it's also worked with prisoners, men in prison. I didn't for a moment think that men in prison would want bronze, silver and gold champion badges and certificates, but they do. And for a lot of them, it's the first time anybody's told them they're any good at anything in their lives. And the idea of a bronze champion, you don't have to be a good reader, but you have to be somebody who's willing to say that reading is good and to sort of encourage others. Silver champions actually are involved in schemes and helping to run schemes to encourage reading. And finally, gold champions make a real big difference. And how we've presented this to the children is, or to the teachers, is to say you can do it 2 ways. You can either get the children who are already very keen on reading, the boys, and get them as your reading champions, say try and make some more boys like you. But actually, that's not the most successful route. The most successful route was to get the boys who aren't readers particularly, get them together and say, we want you to make a difference. We're going to treat you as special, and we're going to ask you to see if you can convert as many boys as possible to reading. And we're going to give you some space in the library, some space in the corridors. You come up with ideas, see what you can come up with. And it has worked, extremely well in some schools. So just a few of the activities. One that's worked really well, again, is this reading wall. The having images of the boys, often with their hero. So we've got lots of posters of, say, football players, famous football players reading, and then the boys have a picture of themselves next to their football hero, and then other boys want to join in because they want their picture up next to Rio Ferdinand or whoever it is. The boys doing their own book displays, getting in people from the community who the children look up to, so it might be the fire service, the police service, people like that, and getting them to come in and talk about how reading is part of their job, so they can see what reading's good for, as it were, why it's useful, why it gets you somewhere. In addition, we want to get the fathers involved. Basically, all the research shows that if fathers get involved with their children's learning, the children learn much more effectively, whether the child is a girl or a boy, if father is involved. And it doesn't even matter if the father is no longer living in the home. If the father has separated from the wife, even so, as long as the child has contact with the father showing an interest in the education makes a really big difference. And so one of the things we've done, which you might also want to think of if you want to get more men involved, is to set up reading champion dads. And what schools in England have found is that if they call meetings for parents, it's the mothers that turn up in general. And if you want to involve the fathers, it might be an idea to call a meeting specially for fathers and possibly not even hold your meeting in the school. Now, this is probably a very English thing, I don't know, but often the men are down the pub, right? And so one school I know has been very successful. It holds its meeting down the pub. And now, actually, they're not standing in the bar having a meeting. They've actually in a room in the pub upstairs. And in fact, a pub is a very good place to meet because people can get something to eat and something to drink very easily. They can bring it upstairs to the main, to the room where the meeting is. And one of the things that the fathers were doing at one of the meetings I went to was talking about reading. This particular group, there are 60 fathers from this one school that meet once a month. They have homework once a month, and their homework had been to discuss, to fill in a little form about themselves as a reader. They had to say what they thought about reading when they were a child, what they, how much use reading is to them now in their adult life, whether they read with their child, what they read now. And for 2 hours, when I went to one of their meetings, I sat and listened to father after father telling us all their experiences of reading. And they were incredibly moving. These were all working class fathers from a poor area of London, coming actually from a whole variety of different countries. I must actually tell the story. The one man from Hong Kong, it was very funny. He said he had been turned on to reading by comics. And as a young man, he was obsessed by comics. And he had collected a particular series, and he had every single one except for number 51. And one day, he found number 51, and he came home triumphant because he could complete his set. But when he got home, his mother had burned all his comics because she thought that he wasn't reading anything other than comics and that he needed to read something other than comics. And he said, after that, I turned to pornography. Right? So, that was his sort of immediate solution. But now, this particular father, not only does he read to his own children every day, he goes into the school, he helps the other children, he encourages the other children to read, and he is also the man who runs the email group for the fathers, so he organizes all the other fathers. And these quotations, there were many more I could have chosen, were genuine quotations as these men spoke. Books have been a lifeline for me, and that was a man who had come to England as a young boy whose parents couldn't speak English, and he had come to love reading himself and was now making certain that his children would have the benefits that he didn't have himself. And so, this idea of, inviting the dads in to come and be role models in the school, because they will all have different jobs. They can come in and talk to the children about the importance of reading within their jobs. Just a few ideas here about reading champion dads. And given the time, I sort of won't go through all of those. We have these little badges, which, again, you wouldn't be able to. You can see them on the internet, but obviously you wouldn't be able to get hold of them. We can't post them over here. We have the posters. You might recognise the second poster on the top. That's Rio Ferdinand. All of the top 4 were members of the England football squad. The next 3 are wrestlers. I don't recognise them at all, but any child in England instantly knows who they are, including the one in the mask. That's a sort of Mexican wrestling sort of tradition, apparently. And the 2 on the end are cricketers. But these people are all heroes to the children in our schools, and therefore we've gone out of our way to get the images of these people reading. All of these people are keen on reading. Some of them will go into schools and actually speak to the children about the importance of reading. And we have found that every school in the country, every library in the country wants these posters. It's actually very expensive for us to get the posters out, but we try and do it. But I think perhaps say Thai boxers, something like that might be something that, if they have to be genuine readers, because it mustn't be a lie. They don't have to be perhaps reading the sort of material that we might think we want them to be reading, but they have to see themselves as readers. We made a video of a series of members of the England football team supporting reading. It is a very powerful video, and all the schools in England can get themselves a copy. You can download it from the internet from our website, and again, you've got Rio. It opens with Rio Ferdinand talking about it. Okay, if we could have the first 5 minutes of the football film. The two people presenting it are the presenters of football programmes on the television in Britain. They're very well-known faces.
Welcome. Today we're going to find out how some of Britain's best-known footballers use books and magazines to stay right on top of their careers. Rob Earl, of course, is with me. Now, how did you get involved in reading the game, Rob?
Well, I think I learned quite early on that kids get to a certain age and they stop reading. They think it's not cool. So as a footballer, as I was a few years ago, you actually can influence kids and you actually start to tell them that it's cool to read. Footballers read, in the dressing room, on the coach, in the hotels. And if you can get that influence across and get the message, then hopefully you can get kids back into the books.
Good point. Good point. Thanks for the moment too, Rob. Right, let's hear first from England's most expensive player, Rio Ferdinand. Here he lets us into a few secrets about how he prepares himself for those all-important games.
I used to read the whole way through the World Cup. I was reading books. I think I had 2 books in the World Cup. It was away for about a month and I read about 2 books. So I used to read most nights. I think reading helps me in terms of relaxing again. Before a game I have a read sometimes, and I've worked out in the way I play football is supposed to get my mind off the game a little bit more than to really get too focused.
And what would Rio say to people who think books are dull?
People that say reading's boring, they probably haven't found the right book yet. They've got to find the right kind of niche and the right area they like to read about. Well, I like reading about stuff that's real, and it's took me a long time to find out that, and that's why I never really enjoyed reading so much when I was younger. I've obviously just found out how I like to read, and that is autobiographies and biographies about people and real things. My favourite book as a kid was The Twits by Roald Dahl. I don't know if the kids actually read it that much anymore, but it was a funny book. That's why I liked it, because it was quite funny and humorous. A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth, but if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams, and you will always look lovely.
And Robbie, Rio's chosen The Twits by Roald Dahl. The obvious gags aside about The Twits, it's a good choice, because Roald Dahl is one of those writers that can appeal to all of us, all ages.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of book that goes across all the spectrum, and I think what Rio's trying to say here is that sometimes before big games you get nervous, you get a little bit uptight, and you need something that's going to take your mind away from that. He's found a book, and the right type of book that you can almost escape in, and you can forget about the pressures and the 90 minutes that's coming up, and he can just lose himself, and I think that's an important message that we're trying to get across here.
And of course that can apply to all of us. We all have tough days ahead, perhaps tensions ahead, whether it's an exam or whatever it can be. You need a switch off, a distraction, and it can be a constructive one, and reading is exactly that.
Even the biggest and best footballers get nervous. We all, they all, I should say, never mind we, they all still have their apprehensions, and if you can use a book, if you can use literature as a way of escaping that, then it's a perfect tool. And I used to use it myself before big games. I'd be lost in a book, sometimes even in the dressing room before the kick-off.
They'd have to remind you to get out.
Come on, let's get out, we've got a game to get on with.
Good point, nicely put. Next up, it's the Chelsea and England star Joe Cole. He was so obsessed with football as a kid that reading wasn't always top of his list of priorities, but since leaving school he's realised how important his reading skills are.
It's hard as a youngster to realise, everyone just thinks it's going to be a footballer, and I've come across loads of people with youngsters really talented and they haven't made it, but they've got a good education, which is so important. And I was one of the lucky ones, and looking back on it now, I should have probably worked harder as well. I read the papers every day, keep up with what's sort of happening in the world, in the news. I read the football magazines. They're always lying about the training ground to relax, and read a lot of autobiographies. I read I think they're interesting to find out, you know, what people do in their life.
Being a footballer means spending a lot of time away from home. Being a good reader has helped Joe to stay in touch.
It's important when you're travelling away to keep texting friends, and that it's an easy way to keep in touch. And obviously you don't want to be sending any spelling mistakes, so you have to be on the ball. So yeah, I do a lot of texting home, especially when I'm abroad.
And when he's not texting his friends and family, Joe has other commitments. He regularly writes for a football magazine and runs his own website.
Yeah, it's just about keeping in touch with people that supported me over the years, and they might want to know a little bit about the ins and outs of my life and what sort of things I've been getting up to, and that, and it's a good way to communicate with the fans, I think.
Now, Robbie, Joe referred there to texting and various forms of communication, and perhaps that's the point. Communication is a good way of getting in love with words, really, and talking to people and listening.
Yeah, I think Joe, by his own admission, has said that he didn't get into books very early, but he's also...
Right, the interviewer there gives us a day a month for free of his time to encourage children to read. And all of the players there, and all of them are genuinely interested in helping the children to become readers. And I think that's the important thing. And we've deliberately chosen people who weren't particularly readers when they were children, people who've turned to reading later in life, because we feel that their message will convert people more than just choosing somebody who perhaps was a very rich background, who has always been a reader, if you see the difference. It's not easy. It looks simple when you see that film. You cannot imagine how difficult it was to get the agreement from all the different people who, as it were, own those players, to all come together on one thing. But if something like that could be done in Thailand, I think it might be quite effective as a way of helping people. And one nursery school teacher, when I asked them, well, what would you do with a film like that? Because we hadn't meant it for nursery children. She said, oh no, I can use this. The children can watch how the interviews take place. Then they have to in role model, then role play, one being the interviewer, one being the famous person, and your famous person has to choose a favourite book, and then they have to be interviewed about why their book is wonderful. And suddenly, the teacher had turned it into something that could be useful for very little children. So in finishing, I just wanted to I've got a few sort of ideas here that if we read with our own children, with the children in our family, then we are encouraging children to read. If we can introduce children to a wide range of reading material and be a reading role model, for our friends, for our family, get the conversation going, so we're encouraging people to talk about reading, and encouraging our school that we're connected with to create a reading ethos, so that including the parents and linking up with the library service. Because then, hopefully, if we work together in partnership in that sort of way, then we can make certain that every home is a reading home and every child becomes a reader. So I'd like to sort of thank you very much, and perhaps some of you have got some questions.
Reading Champion นะครับอย่างโครงการ Reading Champion ที่คุณจูเลียแนะนำว่าเนื่องจากเด็กๆโดยเฉพาะผู้ชายเนี่ยเราต้องการดึงการมีส่วนร่วมของเด็กผู้ชายให้อ่านหนังสือมากขึ้นซึ่งเป็นปัญหากับทั่วโลกอยู่แล้วนะครับการที่เด็กๆช่วยกันระดมชื่อของซูเปอร์สตาร์ทั้งหลายขึ้นมาเนี่ยโอเคในประเทศเราก็เป็นอย่างนั้นนะครับก็จะระดมขึ้นมาแต่สุดท้ายเราจะได้ซูเปอร์สตาร์ที่เป็นเป็นตัวแทนของคนอ่านได้จริงๆได้ยังไงมีกระบวนการทำไงบ้างเพราะว่าผมก็เชื่อว่าหลายคนก็อยากจะหาโรลโมเดลแบบนั้นแต่กระบวนการกว่าจะหาตัวจริงได้หรือว่าขอความร่วมมือเนี่ยทำไงได้บ้างครับ
I think the first thing to find out who is the most popular is to ask the children themselves. In my experience, if you are over 20, in a child's eyes you are old and your views are not a child's views. Therefore, first of all, ask the children, and we found when we asked the children that certain figures came very much to the top. We found that it was certain footballers that were absolutely at the top of the list. You would probably have some Thai boxers who were at the top of a list. And then it's a question of seeing which of those people is sympathetic, because obviously some people are willing to get involved in these things and some people don't care. And it is no good if they do not care. Somebody like Rio Ferdinand doesn't give a lot of his time, but he is willing to give some of his time.
And therefore that is very important. The wrestlers, when they come over to, obviously they're American, Mexican, when they come over to the United Kingdom, they actually go into schools for us and they will talk to the children. And it is surprising how much time some people will give. So it is worth finding that out. But I think also we have to go with the children's choices. But also you hope that the person you have chosen is respectable is too strong a word, but immediately we had the posters of Rio Ferdinand. He was in the newspapers for getting drunk and, I don't know, doing something in a hotel that wasn't a very good idea. And you think, oh no, we are going to have to face the newspapers and why are we putting this person, etc. So you do try and choose people who will not be a complete disaster. Yeah? But I think you have to go think who will interest the children.
The next question is posted to both Dr. Sirikon and Ms. Julia Strong คำถามต่อไปให้ทั้งสองท่านนะคะในมหาวิทยาลัยจะจัดกิจกรรมอย่างไรที่จะส่งเสริมการอ่านให้นิสิตและนักศึกษา The question is at the college level what activities can you do to encourage students university students to read
ก็คงต้องเป็นสองกลุ่มคนก็ดิฉันคิดว่าอาจารย์ที่สอนก็คงจะต้องช่วยมีลิสต์ช่วยทำรายการของหนังสือที่เกี่ยวข้องทั้งกับวิชาแล้วก็ทั้งที่สนุกคือพูดคุยเกี่ยวกับหนังสือในคลาสอันนี้ก็อาจจะในส่วนที่เกี่ยวกับวิชานั้นก็คงไม่ลำบากอะไรแต่ปกติแล้วความสัมพันธ์ระหว่างอาจารย์กับนักศึกษาในระดับอุดมศึกษานั้นก็จะไม่เหมือนที่โรงเรียนเพราะว่าลักษณะการให้งานให้การบ้านมันก็ไม่ได้เป็นแบบทุกวันเหมือนที่โรงเรียนใช่ไหมคะเพราะฉะนั้นก็จะค่อนข้างจะมีความยากขึ้นมาอีกระดับหนึ่งแต่อีกส่วนหนึ่งนั้นดิฉันคิดว่าห้องสมุดมหาวิทยาลัยโดยทั่วๆไปแล้วเป็นห้องสมุดที่มีปัจจัยค่อนข้างจะพร้อมกว่าโรงเรียนก็คงจะต้องมีบทบาทในการปลุกหนังสือให้ขึ้นมาให้มีชีวิตไม่ว่าจะด้วยการจัดกิจกรรมหรือเชิญใครต่อใครมาพูดหรือโยงเรื่องของหนังสือเข้ากับชีวิตประจำวันในความสนใจของนักศึกษายกตัวอย่างเช่นจากหนังสือสู่แผ่นฟิล์มเป็นต้นนะคะสมมติว่ากำลังมีภาพยนตร์ที่เอาเป็นง่ายๆแบบการ์ตูนหนูหินเรื่องหนูหินเนี่ยซึ่งมาทำเป็นหนังก็อาจจะต้องมีการพูดคุยเรื่องนี้ซึ่งอาจจะอันนี้ยกตัวอย่างอาจจะห่างไปสักนิดนึงนะคะแต่ว่าพยายามที่จะจัดกิจกรรมที่อยู่ในความสนใจของเด็กในวัยนักศึกษาที่เข้ากับวัยของเขาที่จริงตัวอย่างหนูหินอาจจะไม่ใช่ตัวอย่างที่ดีนักนะคะสำหรับนักศึกษาอาจจะต้องเป็นระดับแบบ Lord of the Rings อะไรอย่างเงี้ยมากกว่าค่ะ Yes, do you have any suggestions?
It's a very good question, and it's a rather sad question because obviously if they're at university, we rather hope they read, but obviously you have the same problem as we have too, that often they don't. Even those who study English sometimes don't like reading English, so there's a shame. Anyway, well, two suggestions. One is that reading groups can involve the students quite well. So if you allow them to select the focus of a reading group, because it can also be sociable, a way of meeting other people, and some people have set up, say, a group that meets every week or every month and discusses particular sorts of books. That can work really quite well. The other suggestion I have is getting the students to volunteer to be reading buddies with children in the local schools, because quite often if they have to be a reading role model, they then rise to the occasion and actually spend more time reading themselves, and perhaps the two combined, so you've got a reading club of the students plus the opportunity to be a reading buddy to help younger children.
แต่ดิฉันคิดว่าถึงมหาวิทยาลัยแล้วค่อนข้างจะสายไปแล้วนะคะคงจะลำบากแล้วก็เท่าที่จะเพิ่งนึกขึ้นมาได้ว่าตอนที่ไปเที่ยวห้องสมุดที่สิงคโปร์Library at Orchard Road นั้นเกิดขึ้นก็เพราะว่าหนุ่มสาวไม่ค่อยอ่านหนังสือกันโดยเฉพาะในวัยประมาณ20ถ้าจำไม่ผิดนะฮะ22-23ขึ้นเขาก็พยายามใส่เรื่องของสิ่งต่างๆที่อยู่ในความสนใจของคนหนุ่มสาวเช่นสุขภาพการท่องเที่ยวกีฬาแล้วก็ทำให้กิจกรรมที่อยู่ใน Library at Orchard Road นะคะซึ่งอยู่ในศูนย์การค้าเนี่ยเป็นกิจกรรมที่เกี่ยวข้องกับ ชีวิตประจำวันของคนในเมืองโดยเฉพาะคนหนุ่มสาวยกตัวอย่างเช่นทุกวันพุธเนี่ยเขาจะจัดกิจกรรมชื่อHealth at Orchard Road ก็คือเหมือนกับเป็นการเชิญหมอหรือจิตแพทย์อะไรต่ออะไรนี้มาพูดคุยนอกจากนั้นเนี่ยเขาถึงขั้นเปิดฟุตบอลตอนนั้นเราตอนที่เราไปเนี่ยอยู่ในช่วงเทศกาลฟุตบอลโลกนะคะก็เปิดให้ดูฟุตบอลในห้องสมุดแล้วก็เล่นดนตรีในห้องสมุดมีแบนด์เลยนะคะมีวงดนตรีค่ะ
ค่ะnext question คำถามต่อไปนะคะในกรณีที่สภาพแวดล้อมในชุมชนที่มีความแตกต่างทางวัฒนธรรมและศาสนาอย่างชัดเจนควรจะใช้กิจกรรมอย่างไรที่ดึงดูดให้คนสนใจในการอ่านและรักการอ่านนะIn a community that has such a diverse culture and religion in one community, what activities can you have that will bring together these people for them to love reading and for them to be interested in reading?
I live in a very diverse community. I live in Brixton in London, which you may or may not know is a very, very diverse place. Many of our schools have children who speak up to can have many as 60 or 70 different languages spoken by the children in the schools. I think it will vary very much from place to place. If you haven't got a reading culture, and let's say you've got 2 or 3 different groups, and each of those groups in its own way doesn't have a reading culture, I think I would begin by trying to set things up for each culture separately. I think if you try and get people to come together first, it might be quite difficult. So let's say you have a Muslim group, then I think I would try and set up some projects for that group, and be very sensitive to their culture and to what they value, so that they can see themselves in what is offered. And then if you've got different groups, then perhaps when you've got to a certain stage, then come together. One thing we found very useful in the United Kingdom with different ethnic groupings is storytelling sessions, including the story props. And so perhaps the people come together, and the story that is going to be told and read is a traditional story for that group. And then the women, and here it tends to be women, make the puppets, and they tell their traditional stories to their children, and they read the stories with the children, and they're starting to see how their culture can be told through the reading. And that has worked extremely well. And for some people it has made them much less isolated as well, because they're coming together, they're seeing other people from their culture, they're feeling better about themselves. And then you can bring the different cultures together. We've had things where one group has come and displayed their stories to another group. And sometimes we've had books of different cultures, so that you've got the different stories of different groupings all brought together, and that can be very, very powerful. And quite often people see that their traditional stories are very similar to somebody else's traditional stories, and they start to see the pattern that is in all human beings, and the book coming together brings those people together.
ขอบพระคุณท่านดร.ศิริกร มณีรินทร์นะครับประธานกรรมการสำนักงานอุทยานการเรียนรู้นะครับที่ให้โอกาสแล้วก็ให้แนวคิดกับเราในวันนี้นะครับแล้วก็ thank you very much again for Julia Strong to join us today.
I would just like to say thank you very much for being an excellent audience, and you have made me feel most welcome.